They had not misunderstood humanity. They were certain of that. The Karveth did not guess. They observed, dissected, and concluded with ruthless precision. For decades, they watched human transmissions bleed into the void, wars broadcast, in fragments, histories soaked in violence, weapons tested with a casualness that unsettled even apex predators. Humanity did not simply fight. It perfected conflict. Entire civilizations in the Karveth archives had been erased for less. So when first contact became inevitable, the Karveth did not prepare greetings. They prepared contingencies. Their doctrine was simple. If a species capable of such destruction ever turned its full attention outward, it would not stop. And then came the incident that confirmed every fear they had ever held. A Karveth cub, young, instinct-driven, untempered by discipline, escaped containment during a controlled observation near a human frontier outpost. It encountered a lone human. There was confusion, a sudden movement, a flash of instinct, and the cub struck. Its mandibles pierced flesh, drawing blood in a clean, primal assertion of dominance. The observers froze. Because across the galaxy, there was only one universal truth. When the young are attacked, or attack, there is no forgiveness, only escalation, only war. The Karveth High Council did not debate peace. War fleets were activated before the report had even fully transmitted. To harm or be harmed in the presence of another species young was the oldest trigger in existence. Retaliation was not just expected, it was inevitable, but inevitability shattered in the span of a single breath. The human did not respond. As predicted, there was no explosive violence, no reflexive retaliation. Instead, there was stillness, controlled, deliberate stillness that made no sense to Karveth instinct. The man's muscles tensed under the sudden pain, breath hitching sharply as the cub's mandibles locked into his forearm. Yet he did not strike. He did not even pull away immediately. His eyes, recorded in perfect clarity by long-range sensors, did not burn with rage, but flickered with something the translation algorithms struggled to classify. Not fear, not aggression, something softer, something patient. Slowly, impossibly slowly, he lowered himself to the ground, bringing himself level with the cub rather than towering over it. A predator lowers itself only to strike or to submit. But there was no strike, no submission, only a careful balancing of presence. The human spoke then, voice low and steady, each word carrying a tone that bypassed language entirely. It was the same tone Karveth brood mothers used in the deepest chambers when calming hatchlings during their first violent awakenings. The cub hesitated, not because it understood, but because its instincts encountered something they had never faced before. A lack of opposition. Pain did not escalate, threat did not multiply. And in that absence, confusion bloomed. The human raised his free hand, not in defense but in contact, fingers brushing lightly along the cub's armored crown, mapping its form with care rather than challenge. and then against every predictive model, the cub released its bite. Blood fell freely after that, bright, oxygen-rich human blood dripping onto alien soil like a signal flare the Karveth fleets would never see in time. Yet the human ignored his own injury with a focus that bordered on the absurd. His attention shifted entirely to the cub. He reached into his equipment slowly, movements exaggerated to avoid triggering another defensive strike. Every observer expected the reveal of a concealed weapon, something efficient, precise, devastating. Humans were known for that. Instead, he produced a compact medical kit, not for himself, for the cub. He guided the creature closer, with a gentleness that defied every biological imperative, examining its mandibles for fractures, checking for internal damage from the force of its own strike. The cub, designed by evolution to dominate, found itself still, not subdued, not restrained, simply still. The human cleaned its sensory ridges, removing traces of his own blood as though the injury had been his fault. Only when the cub showed no signs of harm did he finally turn to his own wound, sealing it with practiced efficiency. Pain was acknowledged but not prioritized. This, more than anything, sent a fracture through Karveth understanding. Predators survive by prioritizing self-preservation above all else. Yet this being, this human, had inverted that rule without hesitation. The observer assigned to the cub could no longer remain hidden. Protocol demanded intervention. If this was deception, it had to be stopped. If it was not, then everything they understood about survival was wrong. When the handler emerged, it did so as a force of nature, towering, armored, every inch of its form engineered by evolution for dominance. The air itself seemed to tighten around its presence. Under any known circumstance, this would have triggered immediate conflict. The human should have reacted with fear, aggression, or retreat. Instead, he looked up from his kneeling position, one hand still resting lightly against the cub's side, and did something that destabilized the moment more effectively than any weapon. He smiled. It was not a display of teeth meant to intimidate. It was something quieter, almost tired, but undeniably warm. He gestured gently toward the cub. "Yours?" he asked, voice calm despite the situation, despite the pain still radiating through his arm. The translator struggled, then succeeded. The handler's mind raced through possibilities, trap, deception, unknown tactic, but none aligned with what it was witnessing. Before it could act, the cub moved. It stepped away from its handler and leaned, hesitantly, uncertainly, against the human's leg. That single motion carried more weight than any fleet mobilization. The handler froze, because the cub was not signaling submission, it was signaling trust. The human did not react with triumph or possession. He simply adjusted, his posture slightly, as though accommodating something fragile. "It's okay," he murmured, more to the cub than the towering predator before him. "You're okay." The handler's translator processed the words, but their meaning extended beyond language. This was not dominance, not conquest. something else entirely. The silence that followed stretched across more than just the clearing. It echoed through command ships waiting beyond the stars, through war chambers where generals stood ready for orders that no longer made sense. The handler lowered its stance incrementally, a gesture so subtle it would have gone unnoticed by any species less attuned to threat displays. "You do not retaliate?" it asked, voice filtered through imperfect translation but heavy with disbelief. The human shook his head slightly, wincing as the motion tugged at his sealed wound. "It's a kid," he replied, as if that explained everything, as if that single fact outweighed blood instinct and every law the galaxy had ever followed. The handler processed the statement again and again, searching for hidden meaning. There was none. "It caused you harm." The human glanced at his arm briefly, then back at the cub. "Yeah," he said simply. "Didn't mean to. Not really." There was no anger in his tone, no demand for compensation, no shift toward hostility, just a quiet acceptance of cause and effect without escalation. The handler had encountered countless species, had ended many, had seen civilizations crumble under far less provocation. But this refusal to escalate, this choice to absorb harm without answering it in kind, was something it could not categorize. And in that gap of understanding, something unprecedented happened. It chose not to attack. The aftermath rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted. The Karveth fleets did not advance. They held position, caught between doctrine and new data that refused to align with it. The cub was returned, but not unchanged. It carried with it more than biological readings. It carried an imprint of an experience that defied its instincts. It had struck, and had not been struck back. It had caused pain, and had been met with care. That contradiction embedded itself deep within its developing neural patterns. Reports flooded the High Council, each one corroborated by visual evidence that could not be dismissed. Humanity was still dangerous. That had not changed. But danger, it seemed, was not their only defining trait. They possessed something far more complex and far more destabilizing to galactic order. They could choose, not react, not follow instinct, choose. And sometimes they chose restraint. Sometimes they chose compassion. The implications were staggering. A species that could wield violence as effectively as humanity, yet not be bound by it, was not simply powerful. It was unpredictable in a way that no model could contain. The expected war dissolved into something quieter, something more uncertain. Observation protocols shifted. Contact strategies were rewritten, and somewhere on a remote frontier world, a human xenobiologist finished his report with a simple note. Subject exhibited defensive behavior, typical of juvenile predator species. No further threat observed. He did not mention the fleets that had almost arrived. He did not mention the line he had unknowingly stepped back from. To him, it had been a simple moment, an injured animal, a choice to help. But to the galaxy, it was the beginning of something far more profound. because for the first time, the apex predators of multiple star systems had encountered something they could not overpower, outmaneuver, or predict. Not a weapon, not a fleet, but a decision